So, as you saw in the leaflet, our next speaker is Filip Lipinski. Filip Lipinski will speak about several stories on American artistic encounter in Poland and the communism. Next, Kaprow, exchange and construction in process. So, Filip Lipinski is an art historian and Americanist. That's very nice. I will also somehow I will speak about in my papers about Americanism, who is the Americanist on titre. I hope that Filip Lipinski is the Americanist on titre in Poland. He's a university professor and works at the Institute of Art History at Adam Mickiewicz University in Poznan. His academic interest is Poznan is in Poland. It's the only one. I mean, if Vienna is really here. I mean, if Vienna, it's Vienna and Vienne in France. In France.
That's
France.
For a discussion about peripheries and centers. Yeah?
Right. So his academic interests concern modern contemporary art, American art theory, and methodology of art history. He's a recipient of several research grants in the USA and Europe, the Fulbright Fellowship at City University of New York, and the Terra Summer Residency Fellowship at the Terra Travel Research Grant at GFK Institute of Research Grant in Berlin. He also received the Kosciuszko Foundation Research Grant at the University of Southern California and the Southern California.
University of Southern California.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
My son was there last month.
Oh, yes.
Last semester. And Los and the Southern California Getty Research Center in Los Angeles. He's the author of two books. Hopper Virtualny,
There's a translation.
Of course, it's a visual Hopper. I tried my Polish. No? I also tried with my Czech, but it worked better.
Okay.
Polish is a bit.
It's more difficult.
It's a higher standard, I would say. It's a disclaimer.
Let's leave hierarchies.
Okay, the virtual Hopper images in a remembering look. And America revising the visual mythology of the United States, as well as numerous academic articles and book chapters on modern contemporary art and art theory in journals such as Oxford Art Journal, View, Artium Questiones, and more recently he contributed to, as I said before, Hot Art, Cold War Anthology, which was published by Routledge in 2020, and it was edited by Claudia Hopkins and Ian White. So, he's a translator of academic texts and deputy editor-in-chief of Artium Questiones. And I leave it to you. I'll take one of them.
Does it work? Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you, Erwin, for inviting me to the symposium. I won't talk about how. I'm the organizer of the third symposium. In Poznan of the series of the Terra and University of Edinburgh Symposium on American Art, which are the aftermath of Hot Art Cold War. So I'm really happy to be here. My paper is different. It's written and it's quite dense and long. So bear with me. So I'll just open the. No, that's the one. Okay, there you go. And while thinking about this, this oral aspect of American art, or the reception of American art in East Central Europe, I was thinking about the fact that a lot of very interesting encounters between American artists or American artworks in Poland are actually narrated. We learn about them not only from, not so much from contemporaneous, reviews or contemporaneous commentaries or books at that point, but usually they are narrated by actual participants of those projects. And so in this paper, I will quote from already published interviews or some interviews that I conducted myself. Okay. I'll just prepare some water. So my presentation will focus on four cases of artistic encounters with American art and or artists in the communist Poland. The NET project of artistic communication established in 1971 by Jarosław Kozłowski, the visit of Alan Kaprow in Warsaw in 1976, a project of an artistic exchange between the Polish and American artists in 1981, conceived by Anka Ptaszkowska and Pontus Hulten, and finally an international exhibition called Construction in Process that took place in 1981 in Łódź. What connects all of these projects is the unofficial or semi-official nature and the grassroots initiatives by artists or art critics. Here, see, I'll come back to these posters or images later on. All of them seem also symptomatic of the political situation and the location of contemporary art in 1970s and 1980s in Poland. They stand in an obvious opposition to state-organized exhibitions of American art behind the Iron Curtain, which were rare and usually belated with regards to contemporaneous art. The communist regime made artists and art critics search for paths to overcome the political and geographical boundaries, exchange information and experiences, as well as strike personal friendships and with Western, also American artists. That was possible thanks to ideas and projects that I will discuss below. While some of them are to some extent known to students and scholars of East Central European art and have been studied, in my presentation I will also try to highlight somewhat anecdotal, seemingly marginal issues, narrated in published or recorded conversations and interviews I also conducted myself. The oral accounts, based on individual memories, reveal additional material to rethink the artistic traffic across the Iron Curtain and highlight the nature of those unusual projects. They also often bear affective overtones, painting a more vivid, subjective, sometimes contradictory, and often mythologizing picture of those times. So let's start with the first one, NET or Acumulatory 2 and what I call unattainable discussions. In 1971, Jarosław Kozłowski, the 24-year-old conceptual artist from Poznan, the city I come from, assistant lecturer at Academy of Fine Arts, with an art critic Andrzej Kostołowski, came up with the idea of NET, a global network of contacts, correspondence and communication between artists, art critics, alternative collectives and alternative institutions. That year, they formulated a NET manifesto, which you see in the picture on the slide, which they mailed to about 350 artists and art critics in Poland and abroad, including 68 American artists, critics, and alternative art institutions. They soon created a platform of communication and exchange of information about their work, sending leaflets, catalogs, and often works of art or descriptions of projects. As Kozłowski says, the ridiculousness and determination of this project, I quote, stemmed from the sense of isolation, confinement, and a burning need to transgress the constraints we were subject to. Besides, I was completely uninterested in the official art institution at that time, end of quote. Kozłowski claims that American art and artists were just one aspect of his, quote, interest in art in general, that is, with no nationality, division into countries or other keys, end of quote. But at the same time, he admitted that, in a sense, American artists were more progressive, and he was more interested in those who got less exposure than, for instance, Pollock or Rauschenberg. The original source for the address list, for the NET address list, were diverse catalogs, which back then included artists' addresses, which is inconceivable today, their personal addresses, and art magazines such as Art Forum and Art in America, available, for instance, at the American Consulate Library in Poznan. They were rare but available. The idea of NET was, Kozłowski explained, that, quote, each of the persons to whom it was sent also got a full list of other names who were contacted. So they soon started to bud, end quote. The artists, collectives, and critics started to use their contacts for their own purposes and circulated expanded list of contacts. Quote, NET worked spontaneously, and it expanded more and more. It has never been controlled by us. It had no center, says Kozłowski. This decentralization was of crucial importance. It was supposed to be global, where neither Poznan nor, for instance, New York had priority. It is unknown how much of the post was intercepted and censored by officials of the postal office, but Kozłowski admits that most of the mail reached its destination. At some point, he shared somewhat humorous idea that works by leftist artists could actually be welcomed by the postal censors. I quote, "There are some anti-Nixonian works. I'm not sure how much they recognize that, but maybe if they saw a caricature of Nixon, they let it go." You have an example of a work sent to Kozłowski by one of American artists, anti-Nixonian one. Here are also examples of letters and actual works that were sent to Kozłowski. Letter from Dick Higgins, for example, and the work sent by George Maciunius of the Fluxus. In 1972, he established Akumulatory 2 Gallery in a university student house, which, as the artist admitted, was a kind of an extension of that project. It provided space not only for exhibitions of the growing collection of works, objects, or documents made to Kozłowski, but also individual shows of Polish and foreign artists. Between 1971 and 1990, when the gallery closed, Kozłowski organized about 170 exhibitions, featuring 17 shows of artists from the United States, such as Ken Friedman, Barry McCallion, John Matthews, Douglas Ebler, Lawrence Weiner, Emmett Williams, John Jonas. You can see her performance here on the screen, or Dick Higgins. Sometimes the communication turned into a long but strictly epistolary friendship, like in the case of the American artist John Matthews, who had an exhibition in Akumulatory 2 in 1975. I quote Kozłowski, "Our correspondence was immense," says Kozłowski. "She was very interested in what was going on here, but we have never met," end of quote. On other occasions, it resulted in personal meetings and close friendships, like the one with the American conceptual artist Emmett Williams, who had 3 exhibitions in Akumulatory 2. In 1980s, when Kozłowski became a rector of the Academy, artists like Williams, John Jonas, or Dick Higgins, who arrived in Poznan at Kozłowski's invitation, performed or had classes for the art students. Quite often, artists send their smaller format works and projects to execute and show at the gallery. I quote, "As a result of the net contacts, I corresponded with George Maciunius," Kozłowski recalls. "And at certain point, I invited him to exhibit in Akumulatory. In response, he sent me diverse materials, prints, books, films, and a very detailed script for a 4-day-long festival. According to this, we realized, apart from Maciunius's works, works by such artists as Ayo, George Brecht, Dick Higgins, Joe Jones, Yoko Ono, Namjoon Paik, Paul Sharits, Ben Vautier, and Robert Watts," end of quote. As Kozłowski reflected on this extremely lively and productive event later on, I quote, "Fluxus Festival," that was actually the last Fluxus Festival organized ever, and it was organized at Akumulatory 2 in Poznan. "Fluxus Festival changed the gallery a lot. The element of play, laughter, irony turned out to be constitutive of thinking about the gallery. It made us get over the aura of intellectual seriousness as a place of conceptual reflection. It questioned the principality connected with thinking about conceptualism as a laboratory," end of quote. Another Fluxus member, Namjoon Paik, wanted to come to Poznan, but he gave this idea up. This is how Kozłowski talks about it. "He agreed to have a show in Akumulatory," explained Kozłowski, "and at some point he had sent me a message. He was neither able to come to Poland nor send any work because he was afraid about his family in South Korea, and because it could disturb his communication with his family, because Poland, meaning, was a communist country. He was afraid that if he had a stamp in the passport, he would not be able to enter South Korea again," end of quote. So this is the political implications of those contacts. The political implication of the communist state apparatus also affected Kozłowski himself, whose first presentation of the net materials in 1971 in his private apartment was raided by security police. The materials were confiscated for a year and his passport was withheld till 1975. I quote, "I wasn't allowed to leave the country even though I was receiving quite a few invitations for exhibitions in various places around the world as a consequence of the contacts developed through the net," says Kozłowski. Ironically, the increased network of contacts via mail sometimes made for him crossing the Iron Curtain physically more difficult than ever. Perhaps those limitations made the project even more necessary and encouraged Kozłowski to continue it. Finally, one more important in the context of this symposium point. What was crucial for many artists from the West, and what Kozłowski emphasized on many occasions, was the art of discussion about art. Quote, "In Accumulatore, we felt really well because people asked about art, and they literally demanded conversations about art until late at night. They were flooded with questions, and the artists really enjoyed it. Back home, it was more back home meaning for the Western artists who actually made it to Poznan. Back home, it was more commercialized and conventionalized. Sometimes these questions were naive, but they were questions about art, and they liked it. In Accumulatore, there was no reception, no wine, but conversation," unquote. Those today unattainable, no recordings were made, elusive moments of oral exchange of ideas, which went beyond the question of art market, beyond the fashionable currents in art, but focusing on actual artworks and ideas that informed them, were in Kozłowski's view the most important value. I quote, "When the artist was present, it was hard for him because there were so many interactions. It was very rough, but they were delighted with it. That is, many artists asking about organizing a show. They knew it was not a place where people talked about bullshit or rankings or who makes more money making art, but about art," end of quote. This anti-commercial and anti-institutional ethos, if somewhat mythologized, but in this case quite true, was also present at the Foxhall Gallery in Warsaw, which I will talk about next. In the early April 1976, Alan Kaprow, American artist, the inventor of the term happening, visited Poland at the invitation of Foxhall Gallery, one of the leading venues for contemporary, particularly conceptual art. The gallery was established in 1965 by young critics Wiesław Borowski, Anka Ptaszkowska, and Mariusz Tchorek. While it was, of course, a state-controlled gallery, it quickly became a venue for some of the most important and radical events in Polish and foreign art of the 1960s and 1970s, especially in the sphere of conceptualism and performance, featuring shows by such American artists as Lawrence Weiner or Joel Fisher. Here we see Weiner on the right, the bearded guy, at Foxhall. The archive of Foxhall Gallery indicates Kaprow was supposed to present a set of actions at the gallery performed by himself and 8 couples of students from Warsaw Academy of Arts. However, the performance never officially happened at Foxhall. In a book-length conversation, Wiesław Borowski, then chief curator, described the situation as follows. During a rehearsal, a set of activities designed by Kaprow, a day prior to official exhibition at Foxhall, the artist asked Borowski if they remembered that he was supposed to get $2,000 for his work. Borowski says, I quote, "We carefully explained to him that may be so, but we have no dollars, and the principles of organizing exhibitions here are different." But he goes on that he has to support his family and cannot make any exceptions. "I was very nervous," says Borowski. "Such a disgrace. I say sorry and ask him to explain it to students who gathered for the rehearsal. They say, quote, so maybe we'll all contribute, the students, to gather the money. We did not translate that into English," says Borowski, and disbanded. "I walk him to a hotel and he proposes dinner. It was very nice," end of quote. This oral account, which demonstrates the economic clash of two art worlds within two systems, seems to be very inaccurate, though. The correspondence, which was revealed in the course of my research for this paper between Inge Becker, Kaprow's German dealer, and gallery owner and Galeria Foxhall, demonstrates that it was Becker who refused to organize the exhibition, and she was aware that the gallery could not pay the usual $2,000 honorarium, and so was Borowski. Moreover, she suggested that she would be interested instead in getting a painting by Tadeusz Kantor instead, as a payment, so to say. It is unknown how Vauxhall Gallery responded to that and what they agreed on, but a situation like that, one described by Borowski in a contemporary conversation from a couple of years ago, could not have happened. When asked about this discrepancy just recently, because I found out that's correspondence, and he was asked when asked about the discrepancy in his account and the documents, Borowski, now 92, replied that he did not remember it very well. So, Milada Śledzińska, then a young curator at Vauxhall, whom I asked about Kaprow's visit, remembered a detail which confirms the economic shock that American artists experienced behind the Iron Curtain. Kaprow wanted to spend the Polish currency received from the Polish Ministry of Culture, some 2,000 zlotys, not dollars, the Polish currency, which had no value to him outside Poland, on a ring for his daughter. It turned out, however, it was not enough to get it. Śledzińska recalled that, I quote, he felt deceived that he got so little money that he could not get a ring for his daughter for all of it, end of quote. But it was good enough, 2,000 zlotys for a good hotel and decent dinners, at least. Since Kaprow decided not to do the show at the gallery, Borowski asked him to give a lecture about his work, particularly about happening, which the American artist agreed to do. It was called Activity Model. There is a photograph showing Kaprow at the table in the company of from the right, Borowski, then most likely Inge Becker, his German gallery dealer, and Milada Śledzińska on the right, a curatorial assistant at that time who worked at the gallery from 1973 to 87. This is, however, not at Vauxhall, but at Dziekanka Student Gallery of Academy of Fine Arts. When I talked about the lecture to Śledzińska, she came up with an interesting theory why the change of venue from the renowned gallery to a student space. In her opinion, it was related to Tadeusz Kantor. Probably some of you know Kantor's work. He's probably one of the most famous Polish artists and theatrical directors. So it was related to Tadeusz Kantor, the internationally renowned and influential artist and theatrical director who introduced happening in Poland and who was strongly connected to Vauxhall Gallery and treated it in a way as his gallery. Kantor most likely met Kaprow in New York in 1965, and it was that year that he came up with his first happening called Cricotage. And Kantor admitted that he had brought the name and, quote, the entire mythology of the phenomenon from the United States, but he also asserted that the process of moving from informal painting to happening was spontaneous with me. That said, Śledzińska supposes, I quote, that Wiesław Borowski proposed or came up with this idea that Kaprow should have a lecture at Dziekanka, the student place, because he was really afraid that Kantor would have something against it, that, well, Kantor is known for happenings, and here, all of a sudden, the creator of happenings comes in to do some activity in his nest gallery. Hence the idea that the lecture would not be in the gallery but in Dziekanka, which at that time was completely unimportant student place. So Wiesław Borowski, she calls him by his first name, could always say, listen, Tadzio, a friendly diminutive of Tadeusz, listen, Tadzio, this is an unimportant student gallery at student house, so I think that was one of the reasons why it happened, end of quote. So we're coming into this kind of a interpersonal kind of ambitions between a great American artist and quite great Polish artist, but on the other side of the Iron Curtain, so to say, which on this micro level, only those oral accounts can bring this up. That might indeed be true, as Kantor was known for his moods and outbursts. While Kantor did not come to Warsaw to meet with Kaprow, he welcomed him in his home city, Krakow, where especially for Kaprow, he brought together his theatrical team and performed a part of his most famous play, The Dead Class, from 1974. Borowski remembers that Kaprow said, I quote, "This is very good, but it has to be shown in the States. Only then it will come into limelight," end of quote. It was soon to happen when Kantor's theater toured Europe in the late 1970s, and in 1979 made it to New York. In fact, the same year Kaprow saw the class in Krakow, Newsweek announced it to be the best theatrical spectacle in the world. In the course of preparing this presentation and research I did, new twists to the whole Kaprow affair were revealed. I do not have time here to elaborate on them, unfortunately, so I'll just point to one aspect. For instance, it turned out that Getty Research Institute, Kaprow Archive, holds notes and catalog of a project called Testimonials, which actually states that the Foxel Gallery sponsored the project, and it involved activities designed by Kaprow to be performed by 8 couples of Polish students. It says literally in this catalog that the Foxel Gallery sponsored the activities and they took place there, while nobody else, nobody confirms that. It is illustrated by photos by B. Ottinger, but nothing is known of her presence in Warsaw. Oddly enough, the same photographs appear in a catalogue from Berlin issued a few months later by René Bloch Gallery, which means that most likely Kaprow used pre-arranged photos illustrating a kind of activities rather than specific ones taken at a place where they were performed. What is more, in a recently discovered correspondence, Borowski writes to Kaprow that he was interested in 1,000 copies of a catalogue for which he agreed to pay a few $100s, a shocking amount in the reality of Poland of 1970s. Foxel Gallery never actually got that catalogue, which refers to the project it allegedly sponsored, perhaps because the action never happened, and the catalogue was printed in advance but never sent to Poland. But for scholars who would like to base their research on the existing materials and omitted oral accounts of people who assert that the activity at that gallery never happened, Kaprow officially went through with his project in Warsaw. Again, it remains to be seen what my ongoing research at Foxel Archive is going to reveal. And the third part, exchange beyond institution. Beyond institutions, that's a question mark. In 1970, Anka Ptaszkowska, now 88, an art critic and a co-founder of Foxel Gallery, after one of the many conflicts, left the gallery and went to Paris. There she opened another gallery and ran different projects, but stayed in touch with Poland and Polish artists. In the late 1970s, she came up with an idea of an exchange of artworks between artists, with no mediation of galleries or institutions. She enjoyed the vision of circulation of art, which would omit market-oriented dealings and institutional selection of what Ptaszkowska calls censorship. We have to remember that despite the fledgling attempts to sell Polish art internationally, which officially was possible only through DESA, a state agency dealing with the sales of art and antiques established in 1950, there was hardly any art market in today's meaning of the term in the communist Poland or in East Central Europe in general. Ptaszkowska so described the idea of the exchange in a conversation I had with her. I quote, "Why exchange? To exclude money from the play. It was extremely important to me because for me the limitation of art by commercialism is a thing most unacceptable. It was also finding a certain place, a certain practice which would resist this limitation of art by commercialism. The practice here was to give up any kind of censorship, that is, selection, and external selection," end of quote. The most general framework for this idea was the fact, this is a poster of an exhibition which sort of came of it. I'll talk about it in a second. The most general framework for this idea was in fact connected with institutions, but in an unusual way. It was to get, I have 40 minutes, yeah? Erwin? I have 40 minutes, yeah? Yeah, so, okay. I just thought maybe. Okay. So, the institution were involved, but in a very unusual way. It was to get together Polish and international artists who would donate one work each, and then the respective groups of artworks would travel to galleries or museums, which would accept them with no selection, the whole batch, consisting of objects that were selected by artists only, by the artists who donated them. And in between stage was supposed to be an exhibition. And I quote Ptaszkowska, "Artists decided what to donate. It was about making the exchange independently of any institution. Therefore, MoCA or any other institution that these pictures reached, they just could say yes or no, but they had no right to choose, to say that this is better and this is worse, says Ptaszkowska. On the Polish side, the obvious choice for Ptaszkowska was Art Museum in Łódź because of its analogical foundation. It was the second after MoMA in New York collection of modern art created in 1931 at the initiative of artists, especially Władysław Strzemiński, based on donations from international, mainly Paris-based artists. Hence the 1931 date here in the title of the exhibition. The partner on the other side of the Iron Curtain was to be determined. As Ptaszkowska recalled, I quote, about the idea of exchange, I met with Thomas Messer. Then Thomas Messer was the director of Guggenheim Museum in New York. And Thomas Messer got extremely excited about it, she recalls. And Messer called the ministry, and I was there, and he said that this exchange is so amazing. And I said, niet, meaning no. I said that it is not an exchange between museums. Stanisławski, then the Ryszard Stanisławski, which is was the director of Art Museum in Łódź, was mad because it was such a treat with Guggenheim, end of quote. Ptaszkowska says that Messer wanted to have a say in the selection of artists, and she would not allow that. She was also friends with Pontus Hulten, who would visit Poland and New Foxhall, and then they would also meet in France and Sweden. Hulten, a former director of Moderna Museet in Stockholm, was very much interested in American art and created a fantastic collection of American modern art there. He was also the first director and co-creator of Musée Pompidou in Paris, and then the first director of Museum of Contemporary Art in Los Angeles from 1980 to 1984. Hulten got excited about the project, accepting it on Ptaszkowska's terms, and the whole idea started to materialize sometime in 1980. It also seemed to be a very convenient time. In August 1980, Solidarity, the first independent workers' trade union, was created, and it started more than a year of liberalization in Poland, which then seemed like a first step towards the fall of communism. Hulten proposed American artists with whom he had good contacts and was in touch because of his new position at MoCA. Ptaszkowska remembers that, quote, it was Pontus who decided about the choice of American artists because he was very involved in American art, and I accepted it. Anyways, American art was very important for us. It was not about any nationalism, but simply American art was important. And since informal fluxes or happening and so on, there were many elements and artists were aware of it in Poland. It was the most vibrant. I will put it this way, she says, because France for us was more like a traditional good taste, that literacy, and American art was open. It was decisive, end of quote. Hence, in December 1981, Ptaszkowska went to Los Angeles to give a talk about the idea of the exchange, where she emphasized the anti-institutional dimension of the project and the priority artists had in decision-making. She delivered it at the studio of Sam Francis, the West Coast abstract painter. Ptaszkowska remembers that the lecture was well attended and followed by a reception at a different location. And as she put it, after my talk at Sam Francis's, the word spread. Perhaps also the events in Poland helped the momentum of the project. Solidarity movement was widely followed by a symptom of changes behind the Iron Curtain, and in December, when Ptaszkowska was in LA, martial law was introduced, which was a backlash of the communist authorities, which spurred a reaction and solidarity with Polish people. I quote, martial law mobilized American artists participating in the exchange. It was a political gesture, obviously, she admitted. However, when I tried to focus on this political dimension in our conversation, Ptaszkowska got somehow irritated as she did not want that to obscure her ethos of autonomy of art and the main underlying idea of an inter-artistic exchange. The exchange, here you have a list of participants of the exchange project. It's alphabetical, it's both Polish and American. The exchange project was in fact a treat for MoCA, a fledgling museum at the time, building its collection based on donations from private collectors and artists. While Hulten and perhaps also Sam Francis supervised the collecting of works, On the American West Coast, it was Ptaszkowska who circulated the idea among her milieu, mostly related to Vauxhall Gallery. Hence, as it usually happens, the founding idea seems further complicated, and Ptaszkowska reluctantly admitted that, after all, there was some selection of artists, if not specific works, defending it that they did not want really bad art. As a result, altogether 52 artists donated 51 works, including 36 American and 16 Polish artists. The receiving institutions were Art Museum in Łódź and Museum of Contemporary Art in Los Angeles. American artists included John Baldessari, Chris Burden, Sam Francis, Dan Graham, Douglas Ibler, Richard Jackson, Paul Sharits, or Lawrence Weiner, and Polish ones Włodzimierz Borowski, Tadeusz Kantor, Stanisław Drusz, Edward Krasiński, Henryk Starzewski, Mariusz Stanglet, and so on. However, before the works reached their destination institutions, it was arranged with Suzanne Paget, the director of Musée de l'Art Moderne de Ville de Paris, that they will be shown at an exhibition in Paris in 1982. Later, the show had its legs in Dublin and Belfast, under the title Échange entre artistes, Pologne, USA. An exhibition catalogue was printed and the show was quite successful. But here you can see Ptaszkowska, Hulten at the opening of the, and Suzanne Paget at the opening of the exhibition in Paris. But how come the whole project actually happened? And what was the status of the project on the Polish side? It is actually ambiguous. One might call it semi-official, also due to the changing dynamics of the political situation in Poland. We have to remember that in December 1981, the communist government introduced martial law to prevent further development of liberalization and solidarity movements. Restrictions and persecutions were acute. While the project was not kept secret from the authorities, it was not funded by a Polish ministry either. There is an interesting side of the story concerning the transportation of works from Poland to Paris, related by Ptaszkowska, I quote, "You know how the works were transported? With medicines, because there was the whole exchange and there was help from abroad for Poland during the martial law. The wagons of the train had to go back, so the works were smuggled." End of quote. It is not certain whether this is entirely true, though, and the research on the project being underway, carried out by scholars and curators at the Museum of Łódź, suggests that the issue was not so dramatic as Ptaszkowska described. The oral accounts, again, become a starting point for further inquiry and archival research. That said, the idea of such an exchange across the Iron Curtain and its realization, including a relatively large exhibition, was a huge feat. It was also a great opportunity for Museum in Łódź to enrich its collection. Now it holds the largest collection of American art and Polish art institution. My conversation with Ptaszkowska at the porch, and here's a recent exhibition about Ptaszkowska and her critical work and gallery dealer, well, she was not a dealer, but her gallery work it's just closed in Warsaw. My conversation with Ptaszkowska at the porch of her old country house at Bug River in eastern Poland was finished with a discussion about the fate of the Polish works at MoCA collection. Somewhat agitated, she said, "I need to get them back. We should make a scandal of it." End of quote. Despite the advanced age, Ptaszkowska still keeps the combative attitude and strong views, believing it's a disgrace that proper justice to the history of the project has not been done by the Americans. Truth be told, Polish works feature an online catalogue of MoCA. Some of them are provided with images and credit line saying "gift of the artist by cultural exchange." But again, more research is being carried out as we speak on the fate of Polish works at MoCA. And the last part, construction and process, artists and workers unite. Unfortunately, I do not have time to tell the full story of this fourth project, so it will be slightly shorter. And I guess this is impossible anyway, due to the number of people involved. The exhibition construction process took place in Łódź at the initiative of Polish artist and the filmmaker Ryszard Waśko. It was a huge undertaking, which again was the result of one-man idea and a collective grassroots actions, most importantly, private contacts and the feeling of solidarity among artists. It was inspired by a show that Waśko participated in 1980 in London at Hollywood Gallery called Pier and Ocean, Construction in the Art of the 70s. The Łódź show focused on conceptual minimalist projects and emphasized the process of art making and not only the complete works. It involved 54 artists, Polish and foreign, including 13 American artists, such as Karl Andre, Richard Serra, Sol LeWitt, Paul Scharitz, Patrick Ireland, or Ed Ruscha. Most of the artists sent or brought their projects of often monumental sculptures, which were constructed on site, cut, melded, and bolted by workers unionized under Solidarity movement in industrial facilities of Łódź. The workers participated in meetings with artists, and artists took part in organized strikes. In a way, this resembled on a monumental scale the idea present at Kozłowski's Akumulatory Gallery, where projects described in mail were realized. Vaśko recalls in a conversation with Bożena Czubak, which I will dwell on here, that, I quote, "For artists from the West, it was incredible that these expensive works were actually created. We had no budget. We had to improvise all the time. Workers, students, people from the street helped us." The huge show took place in 1981 in the industrial facilities just before the introduction of the martial law, and indeed was organized in a spirit of collective work, something immensely attractive to Western artists, offering a kind of a utopian realization of the leftist ideas impossible in the US or elsewhere in the West. In Poland, though, they were the result of necessity rather than the ethos of collectivism. Vaśko's memories of the interaction with American artists are very vivid and symptomatic of the time, economic and political difference, but also infused with creative fervor. His stories reveal the situation in Poland through the eyes of these Western, mostly successful artists. One time, when Sol LeWitt arrived in Łódź, he recalls, "I took this world-famous artist to a milk bar." I don't know if everybody knows what a milk bar is. Probably, yeah. So these kind of still exist, but back in the under communism, they were the only bars that you could have like cheap meal. So he says, "I took this world-famous artist to a milk bar where everyone ate the same thing. He looked with horror at the poor working-class Łódź people, the endless queues for shops, and of course asked how I intended to carry out a great international project in such conditions. At the same time, he sensed this mood of enthusiasm, the energy liberated by the Solidarity movement." End of quote. What returns in his account is disinterestedness of people engaged, which amazed Western artists used to the fact that you have to pay for everything. Quote, "The construction process formula emphasized not only the process of creating the construction of a work of art, but the external aspects going beyond the work itself, social relations, energy released in cooperation." At a certain point, Vaśko realized that he could not invite people for such a huge show as a private person, so he decided to establish an institution which he called Archives of Contemporary Thought. Here you have a letter with a letterhead of that. It was not legalized and functioned as an institution only as a heading on a letterhead, as he put it. It was housed in his small apartment in a huge communist block of flats that you can see on the left. The tiny room, which was Vaśko's studio, also housed the archive. Vaśko remembers a funny and immensely symptomatic of a huge gap in the perception of reality across the Iron Curtain situation, involving the American artist David Rabinowitz, who was the first artist to come to construction process, and, I quote, "who was convinced that this whole huge apartment block was occupied by the Archives of Contemporary Thought. I remember him," says Vaśko, "entering our apartment late in the evening where we drank, talking with the organizing committee, and David at one point asked me how many secretaries I employed. I thought he was joking, and I said, laughing, about 1,000. That, Vaśko added, was the most often cited anecdote from the construction and process, and, quote, its humorous echo was the 1,000 Secretaries Press, listed as the publisher of the construction and process catalog, which was published in 1982 by American artists, end of quote. The construction process was an immense success. The catalog was in fact produced in the US by Frank Sandbach and funded by a few other American artists. In 1990s, the works constructed for the show became a part of Museum of Art in Łódź collection, adding to works they received as a part of the exchange project. So unfortunately, I have to pause here and briefly conclude. First of all, these amazing projects have in common certain makeshift, utopian fervor that was propelled by the situation of artists on this side of the Iron Curtain. While these projects had not much to do with political criticism of the system, they derived from the feverish search for intellectual, artistic, and cultural exchange, officially impossible under communist regime, in which encounters with American art and artists played an important role. At the same time, the idea of collective work, working class engagement, disinterestedness, and anti-institutional attitude got the best of socialist left-wing ideas so attractive to Western artists. Second, the oral accounts I provided emphasize this the fragments of them I provided, emphasize the subjective, passionate engagement, interpersonal rather than institutional relationships. Simultaneously, as we have seen, especially with regards to Kaprow's story, they cannot be taken at face value, need to be verified and treated as positions taken by speakers rather than neutral, objective witness descriptions. Even when these accounts turn out not to be true, they can tell us a lot about attitudes, relations, and individual interests of the speakers at a given time and place. Finally, we have to bear in mind that this is the last call for talking to participants and witnesses of Cold War period. Jarosław Kozłowski, who is now 78, recently donated his precious net archive to the City Gallery in Poznan, which will be catalogued and examined academically in years to come. Wiesław Borowski is 92, and while he's still quite active, his memory fails him more and more often. Milada Śledzińska is 73, and Anka Ptaszkowska is 88. And an exhibition about her and her activity as a curator and critic has just closed at the Museum of Modern Art in Warsaw. Ryszard Baśko is 76. The confrontation of their narratives, which are necessarily always somehow biased, often incomplete and transformed by what happened later, with documents and oral accounts, becomes a fascinating adventure and a starting point to verify facts, but also see multiple, hitherto unknown facets of what seemed to be a complete narrative. Thank you very much. I'm sorry it was quite long.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Filip, for the presentation. It was not long at all, actually, because it was so consistent and focusing and attracting the attention. So I'm profiting for having the microphone to ask the first question. You want to? Okay. So yeah, because it was so provoking for me, especially because I'm, delivering a talk somehow connected with the same period and with the same kind of issue. Artists and people from the art world just living those times and somehow now disappearing. So this is the reason that we started the whole symposium, to somehow record and transmit the recording further. And I was really shocked, by your presentation. What I will present is the Romanian artists being only at the receiving end of the relationship with American art. American art was fed to them. That's all. There was no no exchange. Not a single bit of exchange. So they were just receiving. And in the Polish case, it's not only both receiving, but giving and making exchange, and sometimes being the real protagonists of the exchange. So they started. Well, of course, both Romania and Poland were behind the Iron Curtain, but their positions seems totally different. And I'm asking you now about, I even cannot imagine the political circumstances, and I'm asking you about the political circumstances, which is not part of your presentation, but it's part of your, background. Which were the proper political circumstances which permitted the Polish artists to make the exchanges, to go there, to go in America. I mean, for Romanian artists, that would be impossible. They wouldn't have the passport. I mean, very basic thing. Thank you.
As my former colleague and professor Piotr Petrovsky was emphasizing in all of his publications on East Central European art under communism, even though talking about the Eastern Bloc or this side of the Iron Curtain as a whole at large is so misleading. It's like a lot of, especially Western scholars had, hopefully it's not the case anymore, and such symposia as ours try to deal with it somehow. But talking about, and this is what you just said and what you mentioned, that this was completely impossible in Romania, what I just described in Poland, just indicates that in all these countries had certain autonomy in the sense like the politics were completely different within this huge framework of communism or Eastern Bloc. There is this anecdote about the exhibition of abstract art in 1950s when Władysław Gomułka, then the first secretary, when he learned that and there was the delegation actually from Romania in Warsaw, I believe, and they were invited to see the exhibition. And someone told him that Romanian delegates were appalled by the amount of abstract works. It was the time of the so-called thaw in Poland, so a bit after 1956, which was the period of liberalization. So there were abstract works on display, and they said, "How is it possible? This is against our, policy and so on." Like our meaning the Soviet policy. And Gomułka says, "Well, I'm not a big fan of this abstract works, but our Romanian comrades won't tell us what to show at museums." So, well, but your question concerns slightly later decades. I would say that in Poland, as long as the work and such as art was not addressing political issues directly, we could say the more obscure and the more experimental it was, the better. Not necessarily abstract, but because there was a lot of conceptualism going on, even performative actions. The more obscure it was, the easier it was to show it. Because as Ślezińska talked to me a lot about, each opening at Vauxhall Gallery had to be checked in at the ministry. Then there was a person coming to the opening, writing a report, but nothing, they didn't do anything. They were there. There were, the censors or the whatever you call them, agents. they were there. They kept their finger on the pulse, even not the less they understood, the better, because they didn't want to come out as stupid. And, but if there was no overt political kind of a criticism, they didn't, in Poland basically, they didn't say, okay, this is like a Western American kind of a influence and we don't allow for this. No, as long as there was no political message, that was fine. And it kind of started in the late 50s with informel in Poland and abstract painting. Of course, the situation sort of changed, but so the cultural policy about art in Poland in general, and Piotrowski was writing a lot about it, was that, as long as this is not political, go with it. So at least artists have, they won't think and won't do any work that actually could criticize the system. So let them do the stuff nobody cares. So that's how it was. And of course, as I mentioned, those projects like the exchange and construction process, again, sort of took advantage of the situation of liberalization after the solidarity movement in the 1980s. So I'm not saying it would not be possible in, say, 1978, but it was easier then. So, you know, Poles are, well known for trying to find, being able to find different ways of sneaking in and doing the things their way. So maybe that's also some kind of a additional added value to it. So yeah.
Thank you so much for the answer. So you have a question.
Thank you very much for this fantastic paper. I have got 3 comments. One is related to the concept of gender. And I know that in Poland it's difficult to do any kind of research on gender now, but it's really interesting to see the gendered element of this story. So I just would like to encourage you to think about how women were enabling all these serious men to do important work and become your heroes. But, women are, somehow disappearing from the story. The second is about sources. You mentioned several times that the oral histories are not giving the truth. Oral histories never give you the truth. These are performances and they are self-representations. So you cannot expect them to be true. And that's why your method, triangling with different other sources is fantastic. Having said that, about sources, I was wondering if you have checked the secret police reports and the archives, both in Poland and in the US, because we know that the American foreign policy used, of course, these different artists as to promote the winds of change. And I was wondering if you try to get access to those documents, which are now declassified in the US, and also the different reports from the different artists who are actually reporting on each other. So I was wondering if you try to get those reports. And the third question is more like a conceptual question, and this is a follow-up to Erwin's question, that what you presented is actually showing 2 types of exchanges. One is the exchange with the Americans. So, Cantor getting, the catalog somehow, what is happening in the US, and translating it to the Polish context, and of course doing a very interesting translation. And the other one is with the leftist tradition, with the working class movement and the Soviet avant-garde. And these 2 exchanges are very different because, as you pointed out, when the Americans were coming to Poland, they were fascinated by this leftist tradition and not by the simulacrum of the Western or the copying of the Western. And I was just wondering if you think that that might be an explanation why after 1989, when the leftist artist tradition was discredited by the anti-communism, basically all those artists are falling into a void in the Western market. And this might be an explanation why so few fantastic artists from Eastern Europe after 89, if they haven't come with this ticket of, I'm an Eastern European scholar artist, that was Sigmund Freud, artist after 89 coming to the West, they could not make it. And they basically felt, into oblivion. So I was wondering that because of this very specific framing of the Cold War intellectual history, that basically made impossible to create a space for the critical thinking and the critical reflection and the results of the critical thinking further of the so-called American ideas from Eastern Europe. So these are the 3 points about gender, about the sources, and about the missing spaces as a result of the Cold War. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. So I'll start with one you mentioned in the interim, the question of truth. Yeah, I never meant that oral accounts can be truthful in any objective way. What I mean is that the the perception sometimes of witness accounts are like, I was there and I saw that, yeah? So very often this is taken at face value. I'm not talking now from academic point of view, I'm talking about from less sort of a general perspective, yeah? But absolutely I agree with it's just that we have a confrontation between like a document and then an account which sort of contradicts it completely, yeah? Or a letter confirming that something actually happened, and in oral account, it just the same person just says, no, it didn't happen. The question is why he says that or why she says that, yeah? So that's one thing. Gender. Yeah, of course, the art world was, and still to a point is, gender biased. And but as you noticed, even in my account, there were women, and there were the main protagonists like Anka Ptaszkowska and Milada Śledzińska. Maybe not. So, but for example, this is a very interesting question that you brought, because one of the criticisms of one of the main line of criticisms against Ptaszkowska, which is kind of discussed these days because of the exhibition in Warsaw which just closed, is that she was very anti. She was actually gender biased, and she never made an exhibition of a woman artist, being a woman, even though she had like a lot of she was very influential. She was important at Foxhall in the artistic milieu or critical milieu of that time. But she sort of took she used the game plan of male protagonists. So she was like a female male person in the artistic milieu. And of course, and Foxhall Gallery is well known for not showing women artists for different reasons that we can easly guess and know actually. Yeah, it's just because at that time, especially, there was this ethos of art which is actually not political, which was in my opinion, it was a combination of the fact that in Poland at that time, as I said before, you could not really be overtly political, but then and it's sort of combined with the modernist idea of autonomy of art and this sort of a meta-artistic aspects rather than art as an intellectual laboratory rather than political laboratory. Of course, everything is political in one way or another. Yeah? Like the American abstract expressionist was not supposed to be political, and that's why it was political, because then it was used as a weapon of the Cold War. But so the gender politics are there. I didn't address it at all because it was not just a point. It was sort of beyond the topic here in particular, but it is interesting. It is interesting, and Ptaszkowska is still declaring herself as an anti-feminist. So, I mean, not maybe in A-type, but she says, "I'm not interested in this stuff. I'm not really. So when I started to talk and ask her about some female artists and what happened from the 1990s with feminist or gender discourse, what she thought about it, she didn't want to talk about it. Then we have the question of archives. Polish archives, for some reason, are still sealed from that period. Yeah, this is so-called archive of new acts or something like that, which is so it is the question of censorship in 60s and 70s. They are declaring that it's going to be open soon, but it's not. So it's just impossible. A lot of people wait for this to open. They are saying that they are elaborating in the institute of which deals with this is sort of, so no, they are not. It's going to be like a huge work when they actually make it public, but it's not.
So the case files are closed?
Yeah.
Oh, I see.
The case files are closed. So it's an immense source. My research in the U.S. Did not concern that at that point. So this is not something that I'm like, writing a book about. So no, I didn't do any research in the U.S. I did a lot of research in the U.S., but not on this. So I didn't look at that. But it would be interesting. And research is being done by curators and scholars from Museum of Łódź, which I mentioned. At the moment, one of them is at the Getty and looking at some archival things from the American side. So I don't know. It's a work in progress. So, and the last thing, could you repeat that critical? It was something about the critical thinking.
This was a large question about how the different traditions of the exchange.
Yeah. Okay. Now, okay, I get it.
Thank you.
I can only, in a way, agree that a lot of this is so symptomatic that after 1989, artists from East Central Europe had to sort of emerge in the Western world by being East Central European and addressing certain aspects of the past, of the communist past. But what I mentioned, and you sort of picked up on, the fact that there's this sort of a collectivism in progress, so to say, and that was something that fascinated artists, but it was back then. And then after 1990, it sort of disappeared. And I completely agree. And I also agree that when we were that I wouldn't say that there was for example, Polish or I don't know, Hungarian aspects of pop art or minimalism was only derivative of American or British sources. But of course, it was somehow, there was a kind of there's a lot of affinities, and this sort of language, formal language, came from the US. The point is that I'm not sure, it took quite a while to appreciate it. Now we see much more interest in East Central European art in the West on its own. But that is true that at the beginning, when the Iron Curtain disappeared, it was looked upon it was not researched, it was not available, or when seen, American art historians or Western art historians just look at it as derivative of Western art and says, oh, this is like Pollock, this is like Warhol, I remember whenever my American colleagues come to Poznan and I take them to National Museum, what they do, which is quite natural, and I do it sometimes too in other museums, they go through the rooms and say, oh, this is like this is what they recognize, the familiar they recognize in art that they're not familiar with. Yeah. So this is like, I don't know, this is like kind of Judd, this is like Miriam Shapiro, whatever. Yeah. And it's like it is somehow I don't like it, but I understand that because sometimes I do it by myself in a way. Yeah, but they have this sort of imperialist kind of a look to like, oh, so this is all derivative. We all know that, yeah. So, and if they don't know something, that's interesting because they just don't talk about it, they don't pay attention to it, or they actually stop and make an effort, depending on the individual. So I generally agree with your, I don't know, the description of the situation, of that dynamic. Yeah.
Thank you so much.